right after the family lawyer revealed a secret that made the blood in my veins freeze. I was the sole heir to my grandparents' massive $100 million fortune. My biological family lost their minds. They demanded I hand over the entire fortune immediately. When I refused, they brought an armed mercenary eviction team right to the front door of my grandfather's lakefront mansion to forcibly kick me out. But their arrogant smiles suddenly froze and turned into sheer horror when they saw exactly who was standing right behind me on the steps that day. My name is Fiona. I am 33 years old this year. I am a senior luxury asset appraiser in New York. If you have also been targeted by your own flesh and blood, who tried to ruin your life just because of bottomless greed, let me know where you are listening to this story from in the comments section below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, because you will want to witness in detail how I crushed their entire world with a single phone call. The funeral for my grandfather, Charles, and my grandmother, Beatrice, had just ended exactly 3 hours ago. They had passed away in a tragic and mysterious plane crash. I sat silently in the sprawling living room of the Crystal Lakefront mansion worth $15 million. My eyes were glued to the flickering flames in the fireplace. My fingers tightly gripped my grandfather's vintage gold pocket watch. It was the only item found and recovered from the crash site. The massive solid oak doors were suddenly violently pushed open, with a deafening crash that echoed across the vaulted ceilings. I didn't even bother to blink. I knew exactly who the intruders were. My older brother, Brad, aggressively stormed into the room. Hot on his heels were my younger sister Amber and her husband, Malik Jones. Malik was a highly cunning real estate lawyer from Atlanta, draped in a custom-tailored Tom Ford suit and wearing a sneer on his lips. They were not wearing funeral attire. They did not look like they were grieving the deaths of our grandparents at all. They looked exactly like a pack of predators who had just cornered a wounded animal. Brad walked straight to the armchair I was sitting in, aggressively slapping my hand away, causing my grandfather's watch to clatter onto the stone floor. "Playtime as a freeloader is over, Fiona," Brad roared, his face flushed with anger as he attacked me. "Pack up your cheap luggage and get the hell out of this mansion right now, before I call the police to handcuff you and drag you out." Before I could even bend down to pick up the watch, Malik stepped forward. He moved with the supreme arrogance of a man who thought he held all the trump cards. He threw a thick, leather-bound stack of documents straight down onto the glass coffee table, shattering my porcelain teacup. Hot tea splashed everywhere, but Malik simply reached up to adjust his gold Rolex watch with a calm, calculated movement. "Let me translate this into layman's terms for you to understand, Fiona. Since you obviously know nothing about corporate law," Malik said, his voice dripping with condescension and contempt. "This is an emergency eviction order that was signed and stamped by a district judge exactly 1 hour ago. According to the temporary inheritance clause, Brad is now the legal executor of the family trust and the new director of the corporation. This lakefront mansion has been registered as collateral for an emergency corporate loan. You hold absolutely no position on the board of directors. You have zero legal standing to be present on this property." I stared at the bright red seal on the stack of papers. My mind began to race, analyzing every single word Malik had just uttered. As a luxury asset appraiser, my entire career was built upon detecting anomalies and paying attention to the tiniest details that others overlooked. A realization as cold and sharp as ice suddenly flashed through my mind. You cannot possibly get a district judge to sign off on an emergency eviction order and register a $15 million property as corporate collateral just a mere 3 hours after a funeral. This entire stack of papers, the legal loopholes, these filings must have been prepared months in advance. Malik and Brad had orchestrated this hostile takeover long before my grandfather's plane fell from the sky. Amber crossed her arms over her chest and looked me up and down with utter disgust. "God, you look pathetic," Amber mocked. "Are you really wearing a discount rack coat to sit in a $15 million mansion?" You don't belong here, Fiona. You have never belonged here. She paced back and forth around the room, running her meticulously manicured fingers over the antique mahogany furniture with naked, greedy intent. Did you honestly think Grandpa wanted a lowly inventory clerk to inherit this house? Amber let out a shrill, cruel laugh that echoed against the high walls. Mom and Dad let you drown in $120,000 of student debt at college because your appraiser degree was just a useless joke. Meanwhile, Brad is the one doing the real work. Mom and Dad funded Brad's hedge fund with millions of dollars because he is the true heir. You are just the family disappointment, a nobody who makes a living counting furniture for other people. I remained completely silent, offering a cold, composed smile and letting her vicious words hang in the air. The truth was, the family had abandoned me financially the very moment I refused to become their obedient puppet. They threw millions of dollars into Brad's failing Wall Street ventures, while I had to work 3 grueling jobs to pay off my student loans and climb my way up to a powerful luxury asset appraiser position in New York. None of them knew what I actually did or how much power I held, because in their eyes, I was forever just the background daughter. But my absolute silence seemed to only infuriate Brad further. He kicked the shards of the broken teacup across the expensive Persian rug. "You are a total failure of a middle child," Brad screamed, stepping so close that I could smell the expensive imported liquor reeking from his breath. "You have zero authority over this $100 million empire. You are going to sign a proxy handover agreement right now and walk out that door." Brad pulled a heavy fountain pen from his jacket pocket and slammed it down onto the legal documents. The sound of metal hitting glass made Amber flinch, but I just kept my eyes locked on Brad's panicked, sweating face. He was trying to look intimidating, but my professional training had taught me how to read people under extreme pressure. Brad was terrified. There was a desperate, frantic energy hidden beneath his shouting. He was not acting like a man who had just inherited a fortune. He was acting like a man who was running out of time. Malik stepped closer, leaning over the table to corner me. His voice dropped into a whispered threat. "I will not ask a second time, Fiona. You are going to pick up that pen and sign away your right of residency. If you refuse, I will activate the enforcement clause on this document. At exactly 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, my private security team and the county sheriff will bust down that front door. We will drag you out by your hair, throw your trash bags onto the street, and do it right in front of the local news cameras. You will be publicly humiliated and completely legally ruined. Sign the paper right now." The heavy silence in the room was suddenly shattered by the light tapping of designer heels against the hardwood floor. My mother, Priscilla, emerged from the grand hallway, dabbing her completely dry eyes with a cross-stitched silk handkerchief. She had obviously been waiting in the wings, letting the men play the aggressive enforcers before stepping onto the stage to play the role of the grieving matriarch. She was wearing a cashmere funeral dress that looked more suited for a fashion runway than a funeral. She glided past Brad and Malik, deliberately ignoring the shattered porcelain and the spilled tea on her expensive rug. "Fiona, please just listen to your brother," my mother spoke, dripping with fake maternal warmth. She sat down on the leather sofa right next to me, reaching out to grab my hand. Her fingers were cold and stiff as a vice disguised under the pretense of a hug. "You have always been stubborn, but this is no time for your usual rebellion. Brad is tangled up in a terrible mess in New York. The real estate market is incredibly ruthless right now, and your brother's portfolios have taken a massive hit. If we do not liquidate this property immediately, the Campbell family will face complete financial ruin. We will lose our country club memberships, lose our cars, lose our entire lifestyle. Just be an obedient daughter for once, Fiona. Sacrifice for the family so your brother can survive." I looked down at her perfectly manicured hand gripping mine. A profound and sickening realization settled deep in my chest. She was not grieving the passing of my grandfather, the man who had single-handedly built the very wealth she was draped in. She was grieving the potential loss of her own social status. To her, my entire existence was nothing more than an insurance policy, a sacrificial lamb ready to be slaughtered the moment her golden boy made a financial mistake. I slowly, deliberately pulled my hand away from her grasp. The last shred of familial love I held for this woman withered and died right then and there, leaving behind nothing but an absolutely cold precision. While my mother tried to compose herself, I noticed a commotion out of the corner of my eye. Brad had pulled Malik toward the large bay windows overlooking the lake. They thought they had stepped far enough away to speak in private, but the mansion's vaulted ceilings carried their panicked whispers straight to my trained ears. I had spent my entire appraisal career listening to wealthy people trying to hide their financial disasters. I recognized panic the moment I heard it. "We need her signature today," Malik hissed, his smooth facade cracking for a split second. "The offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands are completely drained, Brad. The federal auditors are breathing down my neck. If we cannot produce a $15 million asset injection by the end of the financial quarter tomorrow, the investigators will launch a full-scale probe into the corporate trust." Brad ran his trembling hands through his hair, pacing around like a rat caught in a trap. I know, Brad whispered back, his voice choking with sheer terror. "But the hedge fund returns have collapsed. We are $40 million in the red, Malik. If this lakefront mansion isn't cleared through escrow before Friday morning, we won't just go bankrupt. We will go to federal prison for wire fraud and embezzlement." "I cannot go to prison, Malik. You promised that this emergency eviction script would work." I sat perfectly still, absorbing every word of their secret confession. The puzzle pieces snapped together with chilling clarity. This had never been about temporary corporate loans or sibling rivalry. Brad and Malik had systematically embezzled tens of millions of dollars from the family trust. They had drained the offshore accounts and left a massive black hole in the corporate finances. The federal government had already started closing the net. My grandfather's beloved lakefront mansion was their final, desperate life preserver. They needed to steal my house to cover up their federal crimes. "Fiona, are you even listening to me?" My mother snapped, her voice losing its fake sweetness. "Stop being so selfish, sign the paper so we can all move past this tragedy." I slowly stood up, towering over my mother. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me emotionally crumble. I reached out and picked up the heavy legal document that Malik had slammed onto the table. The emergency eviction order with the bright red county seal felt heavy in my hand. Brad and Malik stopped, whispering, and turned around, expecting to see me finally surrender. Malik crossed his arms, the arrogant, sneering smirk returning to his face. "Smart girl," Malik said, stepping forward to offer me the fountain pen. "You finally realize you have no way out." I looked at Malik, then at Brad, and finally at my mother. I smiled, the coldest smile they had ever seen. I spun on my heel, walked straight to the massive stone fireplace, and casually tossed the legally stamped emergency eviction order straight into the roaring flames. The paper caught fire instantly, curling and blackening as the bright orange flames consumed it. The room plunged into absolute horrified silence. No one moved, no one dared to breathe heavily. The only sound was the crackling of the burning paper, turning their fraudulent legal trap into a pile of worthless gray ash. "Are you insane?" Brad exploded, the veins in his neck bulging as he lunged forward. He looked like he wanted to physically attack me, but Malik grabbed his arm, yanking him back. "You stupid, arrogant failure," Amber hissed, her shrill voice echoing against the ceiling. "Do you have any idea what the hell you just did?" "You just signed your own death warrant, Fiona," Malik snarled, his eyes darkening with absolute fury. "Did you really think burning a piece of paper would stop me? I have digital copies. I have the county sheriff's phone number on speed dial. Tomorrow morning at exactly 9 o'clock, you will be thrown out of this house by armed men. I will make sure they drag you through the mud. I will destroy your career, your reputation. And your entire life. I turned my back to the fireplace and faced the 4 people who shared my blood, but possessed not an ounce of loyalty. I didn't feel fear, I only felt the cold composure of a predator watching its prey willingly step into a trap. I am not going anywhere, I said, my voice dangerously quiet and incredibly steady. This house belongs to me, and if I were you, I would stop worrying about kicking me out, and start worrying about what is going to happen to you when the sun rises tomorrow. I glided past them without even a backward glance. I walked straight toward the grand staircase, leaving them standing frozen in the middle of the living room, paralyzed by their own rising panic. I could hear Brad kick another piece of furniture, while Amber screamed at my mother to do something. Their violent, chaotic energy was completely meaningless to me now. They had declared war, but they had absolutely no idea who they were really up against. They thought I was just a lowly inventory clerk. They had no idea. I was the only person in the world who knew about the biometric safe hidden in my grandfather's underground wine cellar. And they had no idea what weapons my grandfather had left for me to use against them. I stood at the top of the grand staircase, hidden in the shadows of the second-floor landing. Down below, I could hear the front door slam shut, followed by the screeching of tires on gravel as Malik floored the gas of his luxury SUV and tore out of the driveway. They were gone, but I knew exactly what they were plotting. They thought I was crying my eyes out into a pillow upstairs, paralyzed by the threat of being evicted by a team of armed men. They believed they had successfully terrorized the weak middle child and forced me into submission. They could not have been more wrong. I waited until the large grandfather clock in the hallway struck 1 in the morning. The lakefront mansion was engulfed in absolute silence, save for the howling wind over the dark water outside. I changed out of my funeral attire, slipping into a black turtleneck sweater and slacks. It was time to get to work. I bypassed the main living areas and headed straight down the basement stairs. My grandfather Charles was a man of exquisite taste and massive secrets. He had built an underground wine cellar containing thousands of rare vintage bottles, but its true purpose was entirely different. I glided past rows of expensive Bordeaux and approached the damp stone wall at the very back. There was a specific mahogany wine rack holding bottles of Pinot Noir, produced exactly in the year my grandparents got married. I reached out and pulled the third bottle from the left. A mechanical click echoed softly. The entire heavy wooden rack unlocked, allowing me to push it open just like a vault door. Hidden behind the rack was a flat steel panel, embedded directly into the concrete foundation. It had no keypad and no combination dial. It was a top-tier classified biometric safe equipped with a high-resolution retinal scanner and fingerprint reader. Grandpa Charles had installed it 3 years ago. He never registered my mother's fingerprints in the system. He never stored Brad's or Amber's data, either. He only trusted a single person in the entire Campbell bloodline, because I was the only one who had never begged him for a single dime. I leaned forward, pressing my right eye to the scanner while placing my thumb on the glowing glass panel. The machine whirred to life, sweeping my biometrics with a sharp red laser. A smooth mechanical voice spoke out, confirming my identity. The heavy steel door sprang open with a hiss of compressed air. Inside, there was no cash, there were no gold bars or sparkling jewelry. My grandfather knew that true power didn't lie in material wealth, but in information. Resting quietly on the cold steel shelf was a thick black leather-bound file folder and a military-grade encrypted external hard drive. Embossed on the front of the leather cover, in gold-plated letters were 2 words: Project Reconstruction. I snatched up the hard drive and the folder, slammed the safe shut, and hurried back upstairs, to my grandfather's private study. I locked the heavy oak door tightly behind me and booted up the laptop. My hands were absolutely steady. The emotional shock from the funeral and my family's betrayal had completely evaporated, giving way to the razor-sharp analytical mind of an appraiser. I plugged the encrypted hard drive into the computer. A password prompt popped up on the screen. I didn't even have to guess. I typed in the serial number of the vintage pocket watch that Brad had arrogantly knocked onto the floor this afternoon. The encryption dissolved, and dozens of meticulously organized folders appeared before my eyes. I opened the first folder titled Internal Audit. What I saw made the blood in my veins run ice cold. My grandfather had secretly hired private forensic accountants to track every single penny moving through the family trust over the past 2 years. The spreadsheets painted a picture of absolute financial devastation. Malik and Brad had been running a sophisticated embezzlement ring right under the board's nose. I clicked through the offshore bank ledgers, dissecting the data with a surgeon's precision. Malik had set up 6 different shell companies in the Cayman Islands. He had forged my grandfather's signature on corporate loan documents, funneling millions of dollars from the company's operating budget straight into high-risk hedge funds managed by Brad. But Brad was an incompetent trader. The hedge funds had completely collapsed, dragging $40 million of family money down to the bottom. The next document was a warning letter from the IRS. The federal government had already begun auditing the corporation for tax evasion. Malik and Brad were backed into a corner. They needed to refill the missing $40 million before the federal auditors realized the accounts were empty. That was why they were so insanely desperate for this $15 million lakefront mansion. They planned to leverage it, sell it to a private buyer, and use the cash to plug the massive hole in the offshore accounts before the feds found out. I opened the leather-bound folder and found physical copies of the wire transfers bearing Malik's signature. He had authorized moving the stolen funds into his own personal accounts in Atlanta, essentially robbing his own brother-in-law while helping him cover up the massive corporate deficit. The sheer arrogance of their crimes was truly staggering. They weren't just greedy siblings trying to bully me out of an inheritance. They were desperate, cornered criminals facing decades in federal prison. Malik's threat to have armed guards drag me out onto the street tomorrow morning was not an idle bluff. It was a panicked attempt to save his own life and freedom. I leaned back into the leather office chair, the glow from the computer screen illuminating the dark room. They thought I was an uneducated clerk who would crumble under the pressure of a fake eviction order. They had severely underestimated my expertise. I specialized in destroying fraudulent financial claims for a living. I dealt with billionaires trying to hide their assets every single day. And I knew exactly how to expose a forged legal document. I glanced at the clock. It was 2 a.m. I had exactly 7 hours before Malik and his private security team came to bust down my door. Plenty of time to set a trap they could never escape. I reached into the leather folder and pulled out a single thick cardboard envelope. Inside was a black card bearing nothing but a 10-digit phone number printed in embossed silver ink. There was no name attached, but my grandfather had left a handwritten sticky note attached to the back. It read simply, Eastern District Federal Prosecutor. Use only when the wolves break down the door. I picked up my cell phone and dialed the number. The line didn't ring. It connected instantly with a sharp electronic click. A man answered with a gruff voice carrying absolute authority. Read the clearance code, the voice demanded. I did not hesitate. Charles Campbell, Irrevocable Trust, Priority Access. Fiona. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. The faint sound of typing clattered through the receiver. When the man spoke again, his tone shifted from a bureaucratic stance to deadly seriousness. Ms. Campbell, he said, your grandfather told me I would receive this call. My team has been monitoring the Wilson Corporation's offshore accounts for the past 18 months, waiting for the perpetrators to make a fatal mistake. Tell me they made a mistake. They did more than make a mistake, I replied, keeping my voice completely devoid of emotion. They just handed us their own death sentence. Malik Jones and Brad Campbell used this property as illegal leverage. They forged an emergency eviction order and planned to forcefully remove me from the premises, At 9 o'clock this morning, using an armed private security team. They are trying to liquidate assets to cover a $40 million deficit before your financial audit begins tomorrow. The prosecutor let out a sharp, long exhale, a fraudulent eviction using armed contractors on a property under federal witness protection. That elevates this from corporate embezzlement to an extremely serious federal crime. Can you confirm Malik Jones will be present at the scene? He will be leading the charge, I confirmed. He wants to drag me out into the street to stroke his own ego. He believes he has outsmarted the entire system. The prosecutor chuckled, but there was no humor in the sound. I will dispatch a specialized tactical unit to your location by 8:45, he affirmed. We will remain concealed until they cross the property line and execute the illegal eviction. The trap needs to snap shut right while they are actively committing the crime. See you in a few hours, Miss Campbell. The line disconnected. I set the phone down on the mahogany desk, feeling a deep and complete sense of closure. The financial trap was fully armed and ready to detonate. I was about to turn my attention back to the laptop screen to safely eject the encrypted hard drive. But as I moved the cursor, my eyes caught the very last folder resting at the bottom of the directory. It was titled Flight 424. The blood in my veins froze solid. That was the exact tail number of my grandfather's private jet. The same jet that had plummeted straight down into a remote mountainous region just days ago, instantly killing both my grandfather and grandmother. My hands trembled for the very first time that night as I double-clicked on the folder. I expected to find maintenance logs or flight schedules. Instead, a high-resolution scanned document appeared on the screen. It was a wire transfer confirmation from an untraceable banking institution in the Cayman Islands. I leaned closer to the screen, my eyes scanning the heavily redacted financial codes. The sender was listed as Apex Holdings LLC, a name I had just identified in the previous folder as one of Malik's illegal shell companies. The transfer amount was exactly $250,000. But it was the recipient and the date that made my heart stop completely. The money was wired straight into the personal account of the aviation maintenance engineer responsible for servicing my grandfather's jet. The timestamp on the payment receipt was Tuesday, exactly 48 hours before the tragic crash occurred. I stared at the digital receipt as the horrifying reality slammed into me like a physical blow. The plane crash was not a tragic accident caused by sudden mechanical failure. My grandfather didn't die from bad weather or engine trouble. He was murdered. My own biological brother and my sister's greedy lawyer husband paid a mechanic $250,000 to sabotage the plane. They assassinated my grandparents in cold blood just to accelerate the inheritance process and cover up their massive financial crimes before the federal audit could destroy them. A violent wave of nausea hit me so hard I had to grip the edge of the desk to keep from falling out of my chair. The room seemed to be spinning. I closed my eyes, picturing my grandmother's warm smile and my grandfather's steady, protective hands. They were butchered by the very people they had sheltered, fed, clothed, and provided for. My mother, Priscilla, had begged me to sacrifice for the family. She had asked me to save the son who orchestrated the brutal murder of her own parents. The nausea in my stomach quickly ignited, replaced by a blazing, towering inferno of fury. This was no longer just about protecting my house or defending my grandfather's legacy. This was a war of absolute, complete annihilation. I shot up from the desk, the rolling chair flying back and slamming into the bookshelf. I walked over to the large bay window and stared out over the dark waters of Crystal Lake. The sun was just beginning to paint the eastern horizon a pale, bruised purple. In a few hours, Malik, Brad, and Amber would drive up to this house, thinking they were the apex predators. They thought they were coming to bully an unarmed woman and steal an inheritance. They had no idea they were walking straight into an ambush set by heavily armed federal tactical agents. I gripped my grandfather's porcelain coffee mug so tightly my knuckles turned bone white. They wanted to play a cruel game of power and intimidation. I was going to give them exactly what they asked for. I would let them step onto this porch, let them taste victory for a brief second, and then I would bury them so deep under federal indictments, they would never see the light of day again. At exactly 8:45, the peaceful Martian sun and silence at Crystal Lake was violently torn apart. The screeching of tires on the gravel driveway echoed across the estate. I stood in the massive open-concept kitchen, slowly pouring dark roast coffee into my grandfather's favorite porcelain mug. I was wearing a charcoal gray suit, tailored to the millimeter, exactly the kind of armor I usually wore when bringing down fraudulent billionaires in Manhattan boardrooms. Today, I was wearing it to bring down my own bloodline. The convoy barreled through the open, wrought iron gates without slowing down. Two massive black tactical SUVs escorted a large moving truck. They parked haphazardly across the meticulously manicured front lawn, completely tearing up the expensive landscaping my grandmother had painstakingly cared for over a decade. The message they were sending was painfully clear. They believed they owned the place, and they would do whatever they wanted, regardless of the destruction they left behind. Malik Jones stepped out of the lead SUV first, adjusting his designer tie and gripping his leather briefcase like a weapon. Brad got out next, his face flushed with the frantic energy of a man who believed he had just dodged a $40 million federal guillotine. Amber strutted out from the passenger side, clutching an expensive iced coffee and furiously tapping on her phone, likely updating her social media followers on her newly acquired lakefront estate. Finally, my mother, Priscilla, stepped out of the second vehicle. She wore oversized designer sunglasses and draped a luxurious fur coat over her shoulders, looking every bit like a triumphant queen ready to reclaim her stolen throne. The back doors of the two SUVs swung open, and four burly men stepped down onto the gravel. They were private security contractors, dressed in tactical gear, wearing heavy combat boots and carrying weapons in holsters. Malik hadn't hired regular movers to pack my things. He hired mercenaries to ensure I was physically humiliated and violently forced off the premises. He wanted to break me. Brad pointed a trembling, sweat-drenched finger toward the mansion's heavy oak front doors. "Get in there and drag her out," Brad barked at the security team leader, his voice cracking with deranged aggression. "I don't care if she cries or screams. If she locks the door, tear the hinges off, throw her cheap bags in the mud, and toss her out on the street. If she resists, you have full authorization to use force to subdue her." Malik walked up beside Brad, patting his shoulder with a sickeningly smug smile. "Calm down, Brad," Malik said smoothly, pulling the forged eviction order from his briefcase and waving it in the crisp morning air. "We are doing this completely by the book. She had her 24 hours. She is now officially illegally trespassing on corporate property. The local sheriff is already processing the paperwork downtown. This house's and her childish rebellion is over." Amber laughed out loud, holding up her phone to snap a photo of the truck, parked on the destroyed lawn. "Make sure they fumigate the living room before I move my stuff in," Amber sneered, her voice loud enough to carry. "I don't want to catch whatever failure disease Fiona carries around." Priscilla just let out a dramatic, soft sigh, adjusting her sunglasses against the glare of the morning sun. "Just make it quick, boys," Priscilla ordered the guards, waving her perfectly manicured hand. "I have an interior designer coming at noon to remodel the dining room, and I don't want Fiona's dramatic crying ruining my artistic vision. Take out the trash so we can celebrate your brother's new position." I watched their entire pathetic performance through the tinted glass of the grand foyer windows. My heart rate remained at a steady 60 beats per minute. I didn't feel an ounce of fear. I felt nothing but the sheer cold precision of a surgeon holding a scalpel over a malignant tumor. They thought they had the victory in the bag. They thought they were the apex predators. They had absolutely no idea that the dense pine forest surrounding the estate was currently hiding 24 heavily armed federal tactical agents. They didn't know that a federal sniper had locked onto Brad's chest from a concealed vantage point across the lake. The trap was set perfectly, and they were marching straight into the center of it with arrogant smiles on their lips. The 4 armed contractors strode up the stone steps of the portico, their heavy boots slamming down on the wood menacingly. The leader reached out his massive hand to grab the brass handle of the front door. Before his fingers could even touch it, I turned the deadbolt and smoothly pulled the heavy oak door open from the inside. I stepped out onto the expansive wraparound porch, the biting morning wind whipping at the edge of my charcoal suit. I did not look afraid. I didn't look like a freeloader begging for pity. I raised my grandfather's porcelain mug to my lips and took a slow, deliberate sip of black coffee. Steam rose and curled in the cold air as I looked down at the men standing on my property. The security leader froze, his hand still hovering in mid-air. He was used to dealing with panicked, crying tenants who had nowhere else to go. He was completely unprepared to face a woman looking at him with the absolute authority of someone holding all the cards. Down on the gravel driveway, Amber's cruel laugh choked in her throat. Brad's manic smile vanished in a split second. Malik gripped his briefcase tightly, narrowing his eyes as he tried to analyze my complete lack of panic. "Time's up, Fiona," Malik yelled, shattering the sudden silence. His voice echoed across the lawn, desperately trying to reassert his dominance over the situation. "I told you I wasn't joking. You missed the 9 o'clock deadline. You are now illegally trespassing on Wilson corporate property." "Grab her," Malik ordered the guards, pointing a sharp finger at me. "Handcuff her if she resists." I took another slow sip of coffee, locking my eyes on Malik. I didn't raise my voice, but the cold, absolute certainty in my tone sliced through the morning air like a razor blade. "I highly suggest your hired muscle take a step back, Malik," I said calmly, lowering the mug. "Because if any of these men take one more step onto this porch, they will be committing a federal crime. And unlike your fake eviction order, the men waiting in those woods actually have the authority to pull the trigger." Malik threw his head back and let out a shrill, mocking laugh. "A federal crime?" he sneered, shaking his head. "You've completely lost your mind, Fiona. You are a desperate roach making up invisible snipers in the woods to save your own life." He turned to the security leader with a look of supreme contempt. "Ignore her paranoid threats. Grab her by the arm and drag her off this property right now." "I am paying you to do a job." Brad stepped forward, the gravel crunching violently beneath his expensive loafers. "You are pathetic, Fiona," Brad screamed, his voice echoing across the misty lake. "Do you think you can scare us with fake cops? There is no one in those woods. Break the door down and throw her out on the street." The massive headguard growled and took a heavy stomp onto the top step, reaching his thick gloved hand toward my shoulder. He never touched me. The heavy oak door behind me swung wide open. Stepping out from the shadows of the grand hall was a tall, heavily built man draped in a dark reinforced tactical vest. Printed boldly across his chest in glowing yellow letters were the words, "Use Marshal." A gleaming silver federal star was worn proudly on his belt. "I highly suggest you keep those hands to yourself, son," the federal agent said, his voice carrying the calm, deadly weight of the United States government. "Unless you want to spend the next 20 years in a federal penitentiary for assaulting a protected witness." The moment those words rang out, the tree line surrounding the mansion seemed to come alive. From behind the ancient pines, from the edge of the private dock, and from the blind corners of the wraparound porch, 24 heavily armed tactical agents stepped into the sunlight. They moved with absolute military precision, raising their matte black rifles and settling into combat-ready stances. 2 distinct bright red lasers appeared dead center on Brad's chest. Another red dot rested perfectly on Malik's custom silk tie. The horrifying reality of the situation crashed down on the driveway with the force of an avalanche. The private security contractors were not idiots. They were hired muscle paid to intimidate unarmed civilians, not to engage in a firefight with federal agents. The head guard looked at the marshal, looked at the red lasers, and immediately tossed his tactical baton onto the wooden floorboards. He raised both hands high above his head and backed slowly down the stairs. The remaining 3 guards instantly followed suit, dropping their gear and dropping to their knees on the gravel, holding their empty palms out toward the tactical team. The smug smile melted off Malik's face, giving way to a sickeningly pale terror. Amber dropped her expensive iced coffee. It shattered on the driveway, splashing brown liquid all over her designer shoes. But she didn't even blink. She was staring at the tactical agents in pure, unadulterated horror. Priscilla grabbed Brad's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging deep into his suit jacket. Brad's mouth hung open, his frantic energy completely evaporating into choking panic. Malik was a cornered rat, but he was still a lawyer. He tried to lean on his familiar weapon of loud intimidation to regain control. "Now wait just a minute," Malik stammered, his voice trembling as he waved the fake county paper in the air. "There is a massive misunderstanding here, officer. I am a licensed real estate attorney. This is my brother-in-law's legal property. I have a court-ordered emergency eviction notice, signed by a district judge. This woman is a hostile trespasser. You have no jurisdiction to interfere with a county civil eviction." The marshal took a step forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with me on the porch. He didn't even bother to look at the paper Malik was desperately waving. He looked at Malik with absolute disgust. "I don't care about your forged county paperwork." "Counselor," the agent spoke up. "You are trespassing on federal ground." I took another slow sip of coffee, letting the bitter liquid warm my throat before delivering the final legal kill shot. "Your emergency eviction order is completely void, Malik," I declared, projecting my voice across the lawn. "You tried to use this estate as collateral leverage for the corporate trust, but you missed one vital detail. Grandpa Charles was 10,000 times smarter than you. He never put this $15 million mansion into the corporate portfolio. He put it into a blind, irrevocable trust, a trust that completely bypassed the board of directors and named me as the sole legal beneficiary. The ownership of this property was fully and permanently transferred into my name 48 hours ago." Brad shook his head frantically, his eyes darting back and forth between the glowing red laser on his chest and my face. "No," Brad screamed, his voice breaking. "That is a lie. The offshore accounts need this house. You cannot own it, Fiona. You are just a lowly appraiser. She is the sole legal owner of this property." The U.S. Marshal confirmed, his hand resting lightly on his holster. "And as of 2 o'clock this morning, Ms. Fiona Campbell is officially under the protection of the United States Marshals Service as the primary cooperating witness in an ongoing federal grand jury investigation. By stepping foot on this property and attempting to forcefully evict a protected witness, you just committed a Class A federal felony." The leather briefcase slipped from Malik's trembling hand. The forged eviction order scattered across the wet gravel, fluttering in the morning breeze. His perfect legal trap hadn't just failed, it had actively triggered his own self-destruction. He looked at the armed agents surrounding his luxury vehicles and realized there was no way out. He couldn't talk his way out of this, he couldn't sue his way out of this. He had brought a forged piece of paper to a federal gunfight. Priscilla let go of Brad and stumbled a step forward toward the porch. Her illusion of majestic matriarchal status had completely vanished. She looked exactly like an old woman terrified and grasping at the last straws. "Fiona, please," my mother begged, her voice cracking with hysterical fake desperation. "Tell them to put their guns down. We are your family. This is just a paperwork misunderstanding. We can go inside and talk about this over breakfast like civilized people." "There is nothing left to talk about, Mom," I replied, looking down at her with zero empathy. "Yesterday, you told me to be a good daughter and sacrifice my life to save Brad's financial mistakes. You told me to face reality. The reality is that your golden boy and his slick-talking lawyer just walked straight into a federal trap, and breakfast is not on the schedule today." As soon as those words left my mouth, the heavy iron gates of the estate swung wide open. 4 more black government vehicles rolled onto the premises, crunching over the gravel and boxing in my family's luxury SUVs. Men and women dressed in sharp dark suits stepped out. They weren't wearing tactical gear, they were carrying thick, sealed briefcases bearing the gold seal of the Internal Revenue Service, IRS. Malik stumbled a step backward, his expensive Italian leather shoes slipping on the wet grass. He darted his eyes from the armed marshals to the approaching IRS agents, and all the blood drained from his face. His arrogant lawyer facade shattered into tiny fragments, leaving behind nothing but an exposed, terrified fraud. Did you really think a $40 million deficit could be wiped clean by rushing a fraudulent real estate sale? I asked, stepping down to the first stair of the porch. I looked straight into Malik's panicked eyes. You thought you could shuffle corporate funds through Apex Holdings LLC in the Cayman Islands without triggering a federal audit. My grandfather knew exactly what you were doing, Malik. He hired private forensic accountants 2 years ago. I spent all night reviewing the encrypted hard drive he left for me in the biometric safe. I have every wire transfer, every forged signature, and every illegal offshore ledger you ever created. Brad let out a choked, gasping sound. He clutched his chest as if he was having a heart attack, stumbling backward away from the tactical agents. You can't do this, Brad wheezed, his eyes wide and bloodshot. I am the interim CEO of the Campbell Family Corporation. I have legal immunity through the corporate bylaws. You have absolutely nothing, Brad, I declared, my voice ringing out with absolute cold authority. As of 6 o'clock this morning, the federal government issued a sweeping asset freeze under the RICO Act. Every single bank account tied to your name, Malik's name, and the Wilson Corporate Trust has been frozen and seized. Amber let out a high-pitched, shrill scream. She frantically yanked her phone out of her designer handbag, her perfectly manicured thumb swiping violently across the screen. No, no, Amber wailed, tapping furiously on her banking app. It says my accounts are locked. My platinum card has a zero balance, Mom. Do something. They locked my trust fund. A female IRS agent took a step forward, her expression completely devoid of sympathy. She looked straight at Amber and pointed at the shiny luxury sports car parked on the destroyed lawn. Hand over the keys to the Porsche Macan, the agent demanded, holding her hand out. That vehicle was purchased with embezzled corporate funds. It is now federal property. Amber threw a hysterical tantrum, stomping her feet and hugging her designer bag to her chest like a spoiled child. I am not giving you my car. Amber bawled, tears of selfish rage streaming down her face. You can't take my things, I am a Campbell. Priscilla looked as if she was about to faint. The reality of her evaporating social status hit her harder than a physical blow. She clutched the collar of her expensive fur coat, her hands shaking violently. Fiona, please, Priscilla pleaded, her voice breaking into a pathetic whimper. You are destroying us. We will lose the country club. We will lose the penthouse. I will have to file for bankruptcy. You can't leave your own mother destitute. Stared at the woman who just yesterday ordered me to sacrifice my entire future. I felt a profound, ultimate satisfaction watching her elitist facade crumble into dust. You are not destitute, Mom, I replied, my tone completely flat. You are just experiencing the exact same reality you wanted to force onto me. You chose to protect a thief over your own daughter. Now you get to pay off his debts yourself. But the financial destruction was only the appetizer. The true reckoning was just about to begin. The heavy oak door behind me opened once again. Stepping out onto the porch was a tall, distinguished man with silver hair, wearing an impeccably tailored navy suit. It was the Eastern District Federal Prosecutor I had spoken to at 2:30 in the morning. He stepped up beside me, looking down at Brad and Malik with an expression of absolute, deadly disgust. Wire fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion all carry extremely heavy federal sentences, the prosecutor began, his voice booming across the driveway. But financial crimes are not the reason the U.S. Marshals Service deployed a tactical sniper team to this estate today. The last trace of color completely vanished from Brad's face, his knees visibly shaking. And he had to lean against the hood of Malik's SUV to keep from collapsing. Malik started shaking his head frantically, a sound of absolute primal terror escaping his throat. I took a step closer to the edge of the porch, locking eyes with my brother. "Flight 404, I uttered, the words dropping into the crisp morning air like heavy stones. Brad let out a horrifying hoarse sob. He slid down the side of the vehicle and collapsed onto the wet gravel, clutching his stomach as if he had just been gutted. "I found the offshore ledgers, Malik," I continued, raising my volume, carrying the full weight of my absolute fury. "I found the $250,000 wire transfer you sent to the aviation maintenance engineer exactly 48 hours before Grandpa's jet went down. You didn't just steal from this family. You didn't just bankrupt the corporation. You murdered our grandparents in cold blood to cover up your pathetic financial failures." Amber stopped screaming about her car. Priscilla gasped, covering her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide with sheer terror, as she looked down at her golden boy sobbing in the mud. "Brad Campbell and Malik Jones," the federal prosecutor announced, pulling a thick stack of arrest warrants from his jacket. "You are both under arrest for first-degree conspiracy to commit murder, federal fraud, and organized racketeering. You will be held in federal custody without the possibility of bail." The head agent gave a firm nod. The heavily armed agents rushed forward instantly. They didn't read them their rights with polite courtesy. They grabbed Malik by the shoulder, slamming his face against the side of his own luxury SUV. The sound of heavy steel handcuffs snapping shut echoed across the driveway. Malik was crying uncontrollably, babbling incoherently about wanting to make a deal, wanting to testify against Brad. Another agent hoisted Brad off the gravel by grabbing the collar of his expensive suit jacket, twisting his arms behind his back, and locking the heavy cuffs around his wrists. Brad screamed for his mother, crying like a terrified child, begging her to save him. But Priscilla couldn't save him. She was backing far away from her son, looking at him as if she were looking at a monster, her entire world completely and permanently destroyed. I stood on the porch of the magnificent estate that my grandfather built, silently watching the federal agents drag the two murderers toward the waiting government vehicles. The absolute power of the law had crashed down upon their heads, crushing their arrogance, their greed, and their lives into nothingness. I took one final sip of coffee, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. The predators had been caught, and the Campbell empire was finally safe. The dust kicked up by the departing federal vehicles slowly settled on the gravel driveway. The black tactical SUVs carrying Brad and Malik disappeared around the winding mountain road, taking the murderers to a maximum security federal detention facility. They would never see the sky outside a prison cell again. The remaining IRS agents finished slapping bright yellow asset seizure stickers onto Amber's Porsche and the two luxury SUVs. A female agent handed my mother a laminated paper confirming the complete freeze of all personal and corporate accounts, then turned on her heel and drove away. Absolute silence fell over Crystal Lake once again. The only sound left was the water gently lapping against the wooden dock. Down on the ruined lawn, my mother Priscilla and my sister Amber were left completely stranded. They had come here with an armed mercenary team, expecting to throw me out on the street. Now, they were standing in the cold, damp morning, stripped of all their assets, their vehicles, and their arrogant delusions. I observed my mother closely. I waited for her to collapse in profound grief. I waited for her to mourn my grandfather and grandmother. Instead, I witnessed a horrifying shift in her posture. The aristocratic mask had shattered, but her parasitic survival instinct immediately took over. Priscilla wiped her dry eyes with her silk handkerchief and slowly turned to face me. She forced her facial muscles into a trembling, pathetic mask of maternal concern. She took a probing step toward the wooden stairs, reaching her hand out as if reaching for a long-lost daughter. "Fiona, my beautiful sweet daughter, Priscilla began, her voice quivering with fake sorrow. She let out a dramatic sob, pressing a hand to her chest. I knew absolutely nothing. You have to believe me, Fiona. I was blinded by them. I never knew Brad and Malik could do such evil things. I am a victim of their manipulation just like you. She took another step, her eyes darting past me to look at the luxurious, warm space inside the $15 million mansion. We were both too harsh yesterday, she continued, turning on the tears with the precision of a professional actress. The pain of losing your grandparents clouded my judgment. I was just too stressed about the corporate finances, but the truth is, I just missed my daughter. You are the only family I have left now, Fiona. We are the Campbell women. We need to stick together. Let me come inside. Let us sit by the fireplace and get through this terrible trauma together. We can manage the estate together. I looked at her, feeling absolute disgust. She hadn't shed a single tear for my murdered grandfather. She didn't mourn my grandmother. Her entire performance was just a desperate, calculated pivot to secure her access to the empire. After the humiliating incident at the club, my mother and Amber were dragged out by security. Her forged guardianship order became ironclad evidence for the extortion charge. I immediately turned all of the audio evidence and Brad's gambling ledgers over to the FBI just days later. Brad and Malik were officially sentenced to life in prison without parole at a maximum security federal penitentiary. My mother, Priscilla, had all her properties, homes and jewelry, seized to cover the massive legal fees. Eventually forced to live in a rundown slum apartment, losing everything she ever prided herself on. I successfully auctioned off the Shelby Cobras for $9 million and used the money to establish the Beatrice and Charles Empowerment Foundation, an organization funding women escaping familial financial abuse. The greatest revenge is not anger or violence. The absolute best revenge is living a wildly successful, untouchable life and using your power to ensure their toxicity must end. You cannot heal in the exact same environment that broke you. True justice does not require screaming. Sometimes, the most absolute revenge is simply living a brilliant life while permanently slamming the door on your abusers. Comment down below to share exactly how you set firm boundaries with toxic family members. Tôi cảm nhận một sự thỏa mãn sâu sắc, tột cùng khi chứng kiến lớp vỏ bọc tinh hoa của bà ta vỡ vụn thành tro bụi. Mẹ không hề bần cùng mẹ à? Tôi đáp, giọng điệu hoàn toàn phẳng lặng. Mẹ chỉ đang trải nghiệm chính cái thực tại mà mẹ muốn áp đặt lên con thôi. Mẹ đã chọn bảo vệ một tên trộm thay vì chính con gái ruột của mình. Bây giờ, mẹ sẽ được tự mình trả nợ cho anh ta, nhưng sự hủy diệt tài chính chỉ là món khai vị. Cuộc thanh toán thực sự mới chuẩn bị bắt đầu, cánh cửa gỗ sồi nặng nề phía sau tôi mở ra một lần nữa. Bước ra hiên nhà là một người đàn ông cao lớn, phong độ với mái tóc màu bạc, mặc một bộ vest màu xanh navy được cắt may hoàn hảo. Đó là công tố viên liên bang của quận Đông, người mà tôi đã nói chuyện lúc 2:30 sáng. Ông bước đến bên cạnh tôi, nhìn xuống Brad và Malik, với một biểu cảm của sự ghê tởm chí mạng tuyệt đối. Gian lận truyền tiền, tham ô và trốn thuế đều mang những bản án liên bang cực kỳ nặng nề. Vị công tố viên bắt đầu, giọng ông ta vang rền khắp đường lái xe. Nhưng tội phạm tài chính không phải là lý do khiến Sở Cảnh sát Tư pháp Hoa Kỳ triển khai một đội bắn tỉa chiến thuật đến khu bất động sản này ngày hôm nay. Sắc màu cuối cùng trên khuôn mặt Brad hoàn toàn biến mất, đầu gối anh ta run rẩy thấy rõ, và anh ta phải dựa vào mui chiếc SUV của Malik để không bị sụp xuống. Malik bắt đầu lắc đầu nguầy nguậy, một âm thanh của nỗi kinh hoàng bản năng tột độ thoát ra từ cổ họng hắn. Tôi tiến một bước gần hơn đến mép hiên nhà, ánh mắt khóa chặt vào anh trai tôi. Chuyến bay 4 sao bù, tôi thốt lên, những từ ngữ rơi xuống, bầu không khí trong vắt của buổi sáng, như những tảng đá nặng nề. Brad bật ra một tiếng nức nở kinh hoàng, khản đặc. Anh ta trượt người theo sườn xe và ngã quỵ xuống lớp sỏi ướt, ôm chặt bụng như thể vừa bị mổ phanh ra. Tôi đã tìm thấy sổ cái nước ngoài Malik. Tôi tiếp tục, nâng cao âm lượng, mang theo toàn bộ sức nặng của sự thịnh nộ tuyệt đối của tôi. Tôi đã tìm thấy khoản chuyển khoản $250.000 mà anh gửi cho gã kỹ sư bảo trì hàng không chính xác 48 giờ trước khi chiếc phi cơ của ông nội rơi xuống. Các người không chỉ ăn cắp của gia đình này. Các người không chỉ làm phá sản công ty. Các người đã sát hại ông bà chúng ta một cách máu lạnh để che đậy những thất bại tài chính thảm hại của các người. Amber ngừng gào thét về chiếc xe của mình. Priscilla thở hắt ra, đưa hai tay che miệng, đôi mắt mở to trong sự kinh hoàng tột độ khi nhìn xuống đứa con trai vàng ngọc đang nức nở dưới bùn đất. Brad Campbell và Malik Jones, vị công tố viên liên bang tuyên bố, rút một xấp lệnh bắt giữ dày cộp từ trong áo khoác. Cả hai đều bị bắt giữ vì tội âm mưu giết người cấp độ 1, gian lận liên bang và tống tiền có tổ chức. Các người sẽ bị giam giữ trong cơ sở của liên bang mà không được quyền bảo lãnh. Viên đặc vụ trưởng gật đầu ra hiệu dứt khoát. Những đặc vụ vũ trang hạng nặng lao lên phía trước ngay lập tức. Họ không đọc quyền cho chúng bằng thái độ nhã nhặn. Họ túm lấy vai Malik, đập úp mặt hắn vào sườn chiếc SUV hạng sang của chính hắn. Tiếng còng số 8 bằng thép nặng nề, đóng sập lại vang dội khắp đường lái xe. Malik khóc lóc, mất kiểm soát, làm nhảm không thành lời về việc muốn làm thỏa thuận, muốn làm chứng chống lại Brad. Một đặc vụ khác xách Brad lên khỏi lớp sỏi, bằng cách túm lấy gáy chiếc áo khoác vest đắt tiền, bẻ quạt tay anh ta ra sau lưng và khóa chặt những chiếc còng nặng trịch quanh cổ tay. Brad gào thét gọi mẹ, khóc lóc như một đứa trẻ đang khiếp đảm, cầu xin mẹ cứu lấy mình. Nhưng Priscilla không thể cứu anh ta, bà ta đang lùi lại xa khỏi đứa con trai của mình. Nhìn anh ta như thể đang nhìn một con quái vật. Toàn bộ thế giới của bà ta đã bị hủy hoại hoàn toàn và vĩnh viễn. Tôi đứng trên hiên nhà của khối bất động sản tráng lệ mà ông nội đã xây dựng, lặng lẽ nhìn các đặc vụ liên bang lôi hai kẻ giết người về phía những chiếc xe chính phủ đang chờ sẵn. Quyền lực tuyệt đối của pháp luật đã giáng xuống đầu chúng, nghiền nát sự kiêu ngạo, lòng tham và cuộc đời của chúng thành hư vô. Tôi nhấp một ngụm cà phê cuối cùng, cảm nhận hơi ấm lan tỏa trong lồng ngực. Những kẻ săn mồi đã sa lưới và đế chế Campbell cuối cùng đã được an toàn. Cát bụi cuộn, lên bởi những chiếc xe liên bang rời đi chậm rãi, lắng xuống trên con đường dài sỏi. Những chiếc xe SUV chiến thuật đen chở Brad và Malik khuất dạng sau con đường mòn quanh co trên sườn núi, đưa những kẻ giết người đến một sở giam giữ liên bang an ninh tối đa. Chúng sẽ không bao giờ được nhìn thấy bầu trời bên ngoài phòng giam nữa. Những đặc vụ sở thuế vụ còn lại hoàn thành việc dán những miếng dán tịch thu tài sản màu vàng tươi lên chiếc Porsche của Amber và hai chiếc SUV hạng sang. Một nữ đặc vụ trao cho mẹ tôi một tờ giấy ép plastic xác nhận việc phong tỏa toàn bộ tài khoản cá nhân và doanh nghiệp, rồi quay gót lái xe rời đi. Sự im lặng tuyệt đối lại bao trùm lấy Crystal Lake. Âm thanh duy nhất còn lại là tiếng nước vỗ nhẹ nhẹ vào bến tàu bằng gỗ. Dưới bãi cỏ tàn tạ, mẹ tôi Priscilla và em gái Amber bị bỏ lại hoàn toàn bơ vơ. Họ đã đến đây với một đội lính đánh thuê vũ trang, mong chờ sẽ ném tôi ra đường. Giờ đây, họ đang đứng trong cái lạnh của buổi sáng ẩm ướt, bị tước đoạt toàn bộ tài sản, phương tiện đi lại và những ảo tưởng kiêu ngạo. Tôi quan sát mẹ tôi thật kỹ, tôi chờ đợi bà ta sụp đổ trong nỗi đau buồn tột cùng. Tôi chờ đợi bà ta khóc thương cho ông nội và bà nội. Thay vào đó, tôi chứng kiến một sự chuyển đổi kinh hoàng trong tư thế của bà ta. Lớp mặt nạ quý tộc đã vỡ nát, nhưng bản năng sinh tồn ký sinh của bà ta ngay lập tức tiếp quản. Priscilla lau đôi mắt khô khốc bằng chiếc khăn tay lụa và từ từ quay lại đối mặt với tôi. Bà ta ép cơ mặt mình thành một chiếc mặt nạ run rẩy, thảm hại của sự quan tâm mẫu tử. Bà ta tiến một bước thăm dò về phía bậc thang gỗ, đưa tay ra như thể đang vươn tới một đứa con gái đã mất tích từ lâu. Fiona, cô con gái xinh đẹp, ngọt ngào của mẹ. Giọng bà ta rung rẩy nỗi đau buồn giả tạo. Bà ta bật ra một tiếng nức nở kịch tính, ép tay lên ngực. Mẹ hoàn toàn không biết gì cả. Con phải tin mẹ, Fiona. Mẹ đã bị chúng làm mù mắt. Mẹ không bao giờ biết Brad và Malik lại có thể làm những điều quỷ dữ như vậy. Mẹ là một nạn nhân của sự thao túng của chúng giống hệt như con. Bà ta tiến thêm một bước, ánh mắt lướt qua tôi để nhìn vào không gian sang trọng, ấm áp bên trong căn biệt thự 15 triệu đô la. Hôm qua, cả hai chúng ta đều đã quá gay gắt. Bà ta tiếp tục, bật công tắc nước mắt với độ chính xác của một diễn viên chuyên nghiệp. Nỗi đau mất đi ông bà nội đã làm mờ đi lý trí của mẹ. Mẹ chỉ quá căng thẳng về tài chính của công ty, nhưng sự thật là mẹ chỉ nhớ con gái mẹ. Con là gia đình duy nhất mẹ còn lại bây giờ, Fiona. Chúng ta là những người phụ nữ nhà Campbell. Chúng ta cần phải đoàn kết lại. Hãy để mẹ vào trong. Hãy để chúng ta ngồi bên lò xo sưởi và cùng nhau vượt qua chấn thương kinh khủng này. Chúng ta có thể cùng nhau quản lý gia sản. Tôi nhìn bà ta, cảm thấy một sự kinh tởm tột độ. Bà ta không hề rơi một giọt nước mắt nào cho việc ông nội bị sát hại. Bà ta không hề tiếc thương bà nội. Toàn bộ màn trình diễn của bà ta chỉ là một cú xoay trục tuyệt vọng, tính toán để đảm bảo quyền truy cập của bà ta vào đế sau sự cố nhục nhã tại câu lạc bộ. Mẹ tôi và Amber đã bị lực lượng an ninh kéo lê ra ngoài. Lệnh giám hộ giả mạo của bà ta đã trở thành bằng chứng thép cho tội danh tống tiền. Tôi lập tức chuyển toàn bộ bằng chứng ghi âm và sổ cái cờ bạc của Brad cho FBI chỉ vài ngày sau. Brad và Malik chính thức bị tuyên án tù chung thân, không ân xá tại một nhà tù liên bang an ninh tối đa. Mẹ tôi, Priscilla, bị tịch thu toàn bộ tài sản, nhà cửa và trang sức để đền bù các chi phí pháp lý khổng lồ. Cuối cùng phải sống trong một căn hộ ổ chuột tồi tàn, mất đi mọi thứ bà ta từng tự hào. Tôi đã đấu giá thành công những chiếc Shelby Cobra với giá $9 triệu và dùng số tiền đó để thành lập quỹ trao quyền Beatrice và Charles, một tổ chức tài trợ cho những người phụ nữ trốn chạy khỏi bạo hành tài chính gia đình. Sự trả thù vĩ đại nhất không phải là sự giận dữ hay bạo lực. Sự trả thù tuyệt vời nhất là sống một cuộc đời thành công rực rỡ, bất khả xâm phạm và sử dụng quyền lực của bạn để đảm bảo sự độc hại của họ phải kết thúc. Bạn không thể chữa lành trong chính môi trường đã phá vỡ bạn. Công lý đích thực không cần những tiếng la hét, đôi khi, sự trả thù tuyệt đối nhất đơn giản chỉ là sống một cuộc đời rực rỡ, trong khi đóng sầm cánh cửa vĩnh viễn với những kẻ bạo hành. Hãy bình luận ngay bên dưới để chia sẻ chính xác cách bạn đã thiết lập ranh giới vững chắc với những thành viên độc hại trong gia đình nhé. Cảm ơn các bạn rất nhiều vì đã luôn theo dõi và ủng hộ. Chúc các bạn một ngày thật tuyệt vời và bình an. Hẹn gặp lại các bạn trong những câu chuyện tiếp theo trên kênh của chúng tôi. Your job is to live brilliantly, while their job is to pay for what they have done. You do not owe anyone an apology for protecting yourself. Keep your heart as still as a lake, but as sharp as a blade when facing evil. Thank you again for joining this story. Thank you again for joining this story. I hope my story gives you the strength to clean up your life. Be brave, because you are so much stronger than you think. Your boundaries are the best protective wall for your future. When you realize your true worth, no one can take it away. Be brave, because you are so much stronger than you think. You do not owe anyone an apology for protecting yourself. Dark schemes will destroy themselves when no one feeds them energy anymore. When you realize your true worth, no one can take it away. Every empire built on lies will eventually crumble before the light of truth. Be brave, because you are so much stronger than you think. Sometimes, the people who share your blood are the most terrifying ones. Thank you again for joining this story. Every empire built on lies will eventually crumble before the light of truth. Do not ever compromise with abuse just because it comes from relatives. Keep your heart as still as a lake, but as sharp as a blade when facing evil. Do not ever compromise with abuse just because it comes from relatives. You do not owe anyone an apology for protecting yourself. True power is not using money to oppress, but using the truth to liberate. Be brave, because you are so much stronger than you think. Every empire built on lies will eventually crumble before the light of truth. Keep your heart as still as a lake, but as sharp as a blade when facing evil. Sometimes, the people who share your blood are the most terrifying ones. Those who try to drag you down are often the ones who fear your brilliance the most. Be brave, because you are so much stronger than you think. Thank you again for joining this story. I hope my story gives you the strength to clean up your life. You do not owe anyone an apology for protecting yourself. You do not owe anyone an apology for protecting yourself. Keep your heart as still as a lake, but as sharp as a blade when facing evil. Those who try to drag you down are often the ones who fear your brilliance the most. Those who try to drag you down are often the ones who fear your brilliance the most. Sometimes the people who share your blood are the most terrifying ones. Your boundaries are the best protective wall for your future. Your job is to live brilliantly, while their job is to pay for what they have done. Thank you again for joining this story. Be brave, because you are so much stronger than you think. There is no debt of gratitude that allows others to trample on your dignity. Your job is to live brilliantly, while their job is to pay for what they have done. Sometimes, the people who share your blood are the most terrifying ones. Sometimes, the people who share your blood are the most terrifying ones. You do not owe anyone an apology for protecting yourself. Sometimes, the people who share your blood are the most terrifying ones. Do not ever compromise with abuse just because it comes from relatives. Keep your heart as still as a lake, but as sharp as a blade when facing evil. Your boundaries are the best protective wall for your future. True power is not using money to oppress, but using the truth to liberate. Thank you again for joining this story. Keep your heart as still as a lake, but as sharp as a blade when facing evil. Every empire built on lies will eventually crumble before the light of truth. Your boundaries are the best protective wall for your future. Those who try to drag you down are often the ones who fear your brilliance the most. Every empire built on lies will eventually crumble before the light of truth. Have you ever wondered what would happen if you didn't back down? I hope my story gives you the strength to clean up your life. Your job is to live brilliantly, while their job is to pay for what they have done. There is no debt of gratitude that allows others to trample on your dignity. There is no debt of gratitude that allows others to trample on your dignity. Every empire built on lies will eventually crumble before the light of truth. True power is not using money to oppress, but using the truth to liberate. You do not owe anyone an apology for protecting yourself. There is no debt of gratitude that allows others to trample on your dignity. You do not owe anyone an apology for protecting yourself. Thank you again for joining this story. Thank you again for joining this story. Dark schemes will destroy themselves when no one feeds them energy anymore. You do not owe anyone an apology for protecting yourself. You do not owe anyone an apology for protecting yourself. There is no debt of gratitude that allows others to trample on your dignity. Every empire built on lies will eventually crumble before the light of truth. Every empire built on lies will eventually crumble before the light of truth. Your boundaries are the best protective wall for your future. Your job is to live brilliantly, while their job is to pay for what they have done. Thank you again for joining this story. Thank you again for joining this story. Be brave, because you are so much stronger than you think. Be brave, because you are so much stronger than you think. Sometimes the people who share your blood are the most terrifying ones. Your boundaries are the best protective wall for your future. Have you ever wondered what would happen if you didn't back down? Thank you again for joining this story. Be brave, because you are so much stronger than you think. There is no debt of gratitude that allows others to trample on your dignity. Be brave, because you are so much stronger than you think. True power is not using money to oppress, but using the truth to liberate. There is no debt of gratitude that allows others to trample on your dignity. Be brave, because you are so much stronger than you think. I hope my story gives you the strength to clean up your life. When you realize your true worth, no one can take it away. There is no debt of gratitude that allows others to trample on your dignity. There is no debt of gratitude that allows others to trample on your dignity. Thank you again for joining this story. Sometimes the people who share your blood are the most terrifying ones. Do not ever compromise with abuse just because it comes from relatives. There is no debt of gratitude that allows others